All right, so today I'm going to be talking about the podcast with Micah Lowinger and Ashley Carmen. So they started to talk about Alan Freed, who was a celebrity DJ on Wins, WINS, in New York, and he helped popularize the nascent genre through the 1950s. Now a culture of pay to play is taking hold in the world of podcasting. So basically, back in the day, payola was a practice particularly popular in the record industry where DJs accepted money to play records. It went really well for a while until the late 50s and 1960s when regulators scrutinized the practice. The Federal Communications Commission, the FCC, outlawed the practice payola, requiring broadcasters to disclose any payments that they receive from a client, like, say, a record label. So certain podcasts ask their guests to pay money in order to be interviewed on the show or do a full takeover of the show. Some critics call this payola, but some people do this actually as a business, like some podcasters. So it's hard to say whether or not podcasts are using payola, but the language used to disclose these advertisements can sometimes intentionally or not obscure that fact. So they can like say stuff at the end um, just like small things at the end, like sponsored by or like something like that. But they're kind of confusing, and sometimes people don't understand that they're actually paying like the people to come on the show, or the people are paying them. So John Lee Dumas charges $3,500 for an appearance on a show, Entrepreneurs on Fire, and discloses it at the end of every episode. Dave Asprey to close at the end of his show, The Human Upgrade. Um, you know, uh, Dumas decided to implement this guest appearance fee in order to be like, hey, if you're an entrepreneur who wants to be on the show, then you should be able to pay for this. When he did that, he saw an immediate uptick in how well the guests were performing. So the CEO of Dear Media, Michael Bosstick, charges between 20 grand and 40 grand for an interview on a show, which reaches between 250,000 to 350,000 listeners per episode. Ashley Carmen was talking about a guest who spent $35,000 on ads and two appearances on Entrepreneurs on Fire and made $150,000 by converting free podcast listeners into paying customers. So Carmen did all these interviews and she heard various reasons why people would pay to go on podcasts. Some reasons included best-selling books and more sales. So then they were talking about how it feels off that a podcast host might not be authentic about the reason they're having person or the reason they're talking about a product. So podcasts, they encourage intimacy and people do really form relationships. That's why podcasting has been really effective medium with direct to consumer products because people trust the host and know um, that they're reading an ad they actually enjoy. And when we don't know it's an advertisement or if it's buried, it feels like a betrayal of trust underlining the entire medium. Certain people might not feel like they're getting adequate disclosure. So it reminds Lowinger a lot of the influence world, which was relatively new and unregulated for a while. So there's parallels to the influencer world, particularly because the FTC is forcing the issue, and that's the Federal Trade Commission. So the FTC, they think they should regulate these practices because consumers acting reasonably under the circumstances are misled about the nature or source of an advertisement. So I read a little bit up on the Fair Trade Commission. So it says podcasts and brands must make clear to their audiences that there is a relationship between them and the brands they're promoting. You should never hide the fact that you're working with a brand or being sponsored to feature a product. You should also never say that you purchased a product with your own money when it was sent to you by a brand. If there's a material connection between a podcaster and the product or service, in other words, a connection that might affect the weight or credibility that consumers give the endorsement, that connection should be clearly and conspicuously disclosed. So and then they were talking about if we don't know how widespread this practice is, we could be listening to something sponsored without realizing it. Some of the things coming to my mind, like the Pat McAfee show, he paid Aaron Rodgers like $50,000 to come on his show, and he ups his views, and but he was very open about this. I think when you have a podcast, if I ever have a podcast in the future, I have to be very open. I have to follow the regulations. I have to, the Federal Trade Committee has to be something that, or commission, I meant, has to be something that I take into account because as a journalist, like, I need to be transparent all the time, and that same thing goes with podcasts. I need to make sure my listeners knows, this is what we paid the people. This is, the people that paid to get on the show. um, these are the brands I'm sponsoring. And it's actually really wild because I didn't know that guests had to pay to come on shows or vice versa. I never really thought about it, but it kind of makes sense. I think it's in the way of paying someone to come on your own show. It could be negative and immoral, because you could be paying someone to come on your show to like push your own agenda. So you're saying, oh, this person wants to come on my show and wants to say these things. It's kind of like paying someone to be like in an interview in journalism, which we know is unethical, because if you pay someone, they could come on the show and say lies. They could, spread their agenda. So I just need to make sure that I'm doing things morally, and if I am paying someone to be on my show, it's for the right reasons, that I disclose it, and yeah, just make sure that I'm continuing to be transparent and ethical. Thank you.